Okay, here comes the grid. Let's have some fun. All right, so we're looking at a daily chart, but even though I'm looking at a daily chart, I still want to get a sense of what's happening in the weekly, because many times that longer term picture will have an influence on the daily, especially if you have a situation like I'm seeing right here where the cycle timing on the weekly is more suggestive of being in a earlier rising phase or even early peaking phase. That's important information to know. So now I'm going to just do some fib draws here just to see what has been satisfied on the upside already. Now this came very close to that other low. So I'm just going to get a sense of how deep this went, which was probably beyond the 78.6. Now, similar to looking at Baidu, looking at the major there, the major weekly pattern, it came into a typical retracement zone. And that is, it's a little deeper, but it came into, the 50 to 61.8. And those shorts, they exited for the most part. And now, some longs are trying to come back and battle this back to the upside a little bit. We still have a negative reversal scout. And so this pattern right now, for the daily chart, you got to be mindful of where the resistances are. So let me just look at those. Those are already mapped out, but just to get a sense. So it came up to the 50 and it started to pull back a little bit. So we'll just we'll mark again, Katie, 30. Let's look at from about 30 to 31.75 on the intermediate time frame as probably some strong resistance for the daily chart. Just looking at what we have right now. What we don't have here, everyone, is any solid outside of this larger pattern structure here, which I can't have influence my upside targets for a short-term trade. It would only be if I was looking at more of an intermediate or even a longer-term trade where I would use this recent low as a key point for myself. If I felt that this was a developing more bullish, intermediate or longer-term pattern, then I could have my targets be further up on the upside, maybe 33 to say 33 and a quarter to say 34.75 or so. But this low is very important to that, because if this is a left-hand translation that was to develop, then the script gets flipped on me, and I have to be very careful that we don't have a situation that looks more like this from a longer term perspective. I know this was asked for daily, but I want to share some logic around how we can evaluate this. So we have a 61.8 down here, 23.44. We have a 78.6 around 24.69. My point again here is if this gets taken out and there's a close below 61.8, that absolutely opens up the door to a test of these levels. In the intermediate longer term perspective, this would be a left-hand translation. So that's why it's important to know these time frames in terms of where are we on the cycle, which is earlier on. And if I was to expand this, you can see that, there's a lot of time even to go in this minor cycle, and especially in this more dominant larger cycle. So it's imperative that it can hold these lows, this low and this low here, because if it can't, that really opens up the door to some deeper downside price action. So just some context around that. Now we'll get over to the daily because that's where the question was. So we have the reversal scouts turned up. Overall, we had a cycle low breakdown here where we rallied and then we took out the low from where we started. So this was configured negatively. Essentially, was for the most part in the center. So I wouldn't really call that a left-hand translation, but it shapes more negatively than bullishly based on how it finished, for sure. Obviously taking out that low. So I have to be mindful of that. That would mean then when you have a negative pattern structure, that when you get into resistance, you have to be very mindful that there's likely to be some heavy selling potentially that comes into the picture. And if you're being strict to the overall pattern structure, then that means that this low is likely to be tested at some point in this daily cycle, given the negative pattern structure. So let me just think about that then. So if we have a negative pattern structure in GDX, I have to think about both upside and downside. They're from a directional bias perspective, what we have going for us is that the reversal scout is positive, slim ribbon is neutral. However, we've already made a decent sized move off the low. So let's just see. Yeah, we've already got up to that 50%. Now, how this can take shape. Let me. I'm trying to really think this through so I can give Katie all the technical details here to work off of. So what I'm going to do is, and this is how you can do projections for yourself and really think through the outlook. So, and I'm combining multiple time frames here. So what I have in my head is the fact that this is still early in the rising, or early rising, maybe, late rising, but a lot of time to go. And if there is going to be some bullish money flow happening in GDX, we have the reversal scout now positive. So then what? So we've already got up to that 50%. That triggered some selling. This is a strong bullish candle here. So Katie, I'm looking at potentially a pullback that happens to the 50 to the 61, somewhere between 28.66 and let's call it 28.25 is where we really don't want to see a close below that 61.8. And then I'm going to be more conservative. So here would be my upside targets would be 30.50 to 31.01. Now they said daily chart. Now I really would prefer to look at this, Katie, probably from a 3 to 6 week perspective.
Okay,
now it could
so that
happen
puts us out in October.
So it could happen faster, but the problem is this is not right now, this is not in any type of strong uptrend. What you have going is from a minor cycle perspective, barely, you're starting to show some positive signs, but not a whole lot yet. So even with this minor cycle, I would need to see, let's just see how far it's got. Yeah, see, it's interesting how these numbers, the confluences play out. So I got up to that 61.8 of the minor, the 50% of the dominant, and it started to pull back. So if it can hold and not close below 61.8, that's where, if I'm looking at something on the long side, so that's what we'll start with, Katie, is long side. The long side opportunity would suggest to me that we can come back, and that 30.5 to about 31 is really where I see the upside in the next, let's say, 3 to 6 weeks in it. Okay. And now I'm going to do one more for you, and that's going to be, let's talk about the downside. So if this reversal scout rolls back over and goes negative, and let's just say that we get up and we make another little higher high, but it doesn't get very far, and then the reversal scout rolls over. Because of the negative pattern structure, when I say doesn't get up very high, if it doesn't push up above this 30.90 and close above there, there's this risk that this downside could be incomplete. And if the reversal scout was to roll over, and we don't need to put together this strategy right now because the reversal scout is positive, but I just want to point this out, that then again, I would be looking for, you want to look for that next impulse in the direction of the trend. That's where you have most likely, my experience, watching Slim trade with his hedge fund is when you're in the direction of the trend and you can identify the likelihood of the next impulse in the time frame that you're working off of, that's where your highest probability trades come from. Now, we're talking about the question that was asked of us was daily charts. So that's short term. So even though this picture for me is more bearish overall, there is a trade here that I would consider to be a high probability setup. And I'm going to go to my 2-hour chart to get a, because again, you determine your directional bias / position bias, but then you have to ask yourself, if you're going to do a directional trade, a more directional trade, do I have a signal that's telling me it's a go, like right now, or what would it be? And so I'm going to go to the 2-hour chart in just a second. But that's what it would take to break this. If this rolled over, then you have some risk on the downside, where you definitely are going to, definitely high probability, probably 75% or better, you break this low and you get to about 27 or 26. We don't have that setting up for us right now, but I'm just keeping that out there for myself. So I want to be, you hear Arvi talk about this, you got to be agile, you got to be nimble, you got to be flexible, that if this case, this, this use case here in terms of the bullish side in the short term was to break down, what am I going to do? Either I'm going to exit my position, I may consider going a short side strategy, but I'm just putting that out there for myself. So I'm not rigid in only long side setup. Now I'm going to go to the 2-hour, Katie. I'm going to look at, I think it's this one. And we're talking about GDX. Okay. Interesting. So if I was going to put this on, I have, again, I'd like to see it. We're so close to getting a neutral slim ribbon here. So in terms of signals, because we get a lot of questions about signals. Now, I don't love the fact that this SMI was this deep. Typically, that is not a positive thing. So that's why you have to be cautious on when you're going counter trend. So unless this was a significant low, which, we're talking about intermediate time frame there, could give us enough of a rally for this long side case to play out. That's the only reason that I'm looking at this long side opportunities, because we are still more early rising phase with a likely intermediate low in place. Otherwise, forget about it. There's too much risk. But again, you got to be nimble on these where you don't have the backing of a dominant trend yet. Okay. So what would we be looking at here, Katie, based on some of that I shared?
Well, what would our time frame be? If you're looking at a bullish trade, are you based
I'm
on the
thinking the
fact
next
that we're
1 to 3 weeks. Next 1 to 3 weeks. So option expiration probably 2 to 3 weeks out. And
okay.
if I was to be more conservative, it might be 3 weeks out. And then again, my risk, I don't want to see that really. I'm watching that close below that 61.8. So somewhere around a little bit below it. So 28.25 is my reevaluation on that one.
All right. Should I take the screen?
Yep.
All right. And so what we're going to encounter here is something that Matt and I, when we were talking about this the other day, also happened.
Okay.
Do you see Tasty Trade?
Yes.
Okay, so let's even just go into that September 15th expiration cycle. What we have here is very, very low IV rank, 0.3, and
Okay.
a very low price stock. You're not going to collect enough
Sure.
to do a short premium strategy, even if you were to go at the money, like a excuse me, a naked put at the money gets you 45 cents.
Okay.
If you tried to do, let's say, a straddle, which would be selling both of them and basically making your let's see, your curve look like this, which is not at all impressive either. I really
Sure.
even can't get it. You're capping yourself here. You've got unlimited risk to the upside, down to 0 on the bottom. I don't like it. So that means that you have to do long premium, in which case your directional and your signal becomes really important.
Okay.
So if you're getting a signal,
Which we don't have yet.
which we don't have, but let's
Yep.
just say for the sake of demonstration that we were getting that signal and we were ready to pull the trigger on that. So
Okay.
you could just go out and buy, a long call.
Sure. Okay.
This costs you, $110 right there. This is the about a 70 delta, so that gives you almost 70 long shares.
So
Now,
when you're making a decision, Katie, in terms of the deltas, what level do you usually like to look at if you're doing a
if
long
I'm just doing
call?
a long call or a long put, I start right around the 70 delta.
Okay. Now, if
I've
you want, go
and
ahead.
the only reason that I say that is because that I've heard Slim talk about that in,
Sure.
some of his videos in the past.
So do you ever consider something like in the 80s or even low 90s or?
Sure. I mean, these are so inexpensive. Look, you can go and buy a 90 delta call for 285.
Hmm. Now, what if you wanted to reduce that risk a little bit because this is not in a strong uptrend on the intermediate in any way, shape, or form, and even the daily overall pattern structure is negative. Would you consider selling, creating more of a debit spread?
Yes. One thing
Okay.
I wanted to point out, you can put volume here. Look at, there's no volume in some of these, these calls whatsoever. So um, let's try to set up a debit spread. We'll go one strike. We'll do an in the money strike. Let's say
Okay.
the 27. We'll start there. We might not end there. And then let's sell an out of the money to reduce our cost basis. We could go, this would make it a $3 wide. But look, you're kind of skewed on your max profit, max loss. If you're doing a debit spread, it should kind of be almost 1-to-1.
Okay.
So this brings it a little bit closer, 28.30. I usually just play around with these.
Yeah.
This is also very close, 109 to 91.
Okay.
You're
So
risking
can you
91
say that
bucks.
again? Your goal is
Is a
to try
1-to-1
one
on
to
a
one, at
debit
least one to
spread.
one.
hmm
Okay.
On a debit spread, I try to get it as close to 1-to-1 max profit, max loss. Just by, you can use these buttons
Sure.
right here to move your strikes up, down. That's 85 and 115. This is 109 and 91. Nothing's perfect. If
Sure.
you wanted to do even just a super tiny little $1 wide to, dip your toe
Hmm.
in the water.
Sure. Now, when you're doing debit spreads and you're looking at the deltas, do you not want to go too far? Do you always want to be in the money? Do you ever do an at the money debit spread, or what's the pros and cons in your experience?
So I could do at the money, sure. Do
Okay.
29, 29, 31. You're So when you see this, where your max profit is quite a bit larger than your max loss, what that means is your probability is less because for every gimme, there's a
Mm,
gotcha. This is a gimme. Your max
sure.
profit is double your max
Right.
loss. So what's the gotcha? The
Got it.
gotcha is that your probability is much less,
And it
40%.
also means that you need to be that much more precise on the directional move happening, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the faster that directional move happens, the better that option strategy is going to pay out,
Right.
right?
I mean, and this is one way that our analysis maybe is, a little
Can be
bit of an
helpful,
edge. A
right?
little bit of an edge because you could do something like this where your probability of profit, these numbers are based on the theory. But if you feel that you have, some analysis that suggests that this move is going to happen, well, then that probability in reality is, perhaps a little bit more
Higher,
or maybe a
right?
lot more. This is just
Sure.
based on, option pricing.
Please go to the askSlim homepage, hover over that Marketing Partners tab, and click on Tasty Trade. That will take you to a page where you can learn more about Tasty Trade, our preferred options trading platform. If you do decide to open an account with them through our link, that helps you with some special bonuses, and it also helps us.